Hi, my name is Tim. I'm a fly angler based here in London, the United Kingdom, and I'm here to talk about a method I use when conditions dictate it's appropriate and the best method for the day, and that is dry dropper on the end of Euro. So I define Euro dry dropper as fishing the dry dropper method, so a dry fly suspending a nymph below it, using a very long monofilament leader, be it tapered or just straight through level line, or what people in the US would call the micro leader, and where most of that leader is being held off the water from the rod tip down to the dry fly. So when would you use this method? So I love using it where you've got lots of pockets of slack water nestled around faster runs. Anywhere you can get pretty close up to the fish as well, because it is a short line method. Anywhere you've got like back eddies, stuff like that. And I would say water up to about 4 feet. That's kind of what the depths that maximum depths that I kind of fish it in. So what are the advantages over, let's just say, fishing with a fly line and standard Euro? So with a fly line, if you've got conflicting currents, it can just be hard to get the drift because your line's swirling around, going all over the place. Also in this particular, in the footage that I'm going to be showing you, GoPro footage, we've got no space for a backcast, or very little space to make consistent backcast. Compared to standard Euro, it has a few advantages. Firstly, you can stand in one spot and make casts upstream, across, you can go downstream. So it makes searching the water a lot quicker with this method. Also, you might not want to move across the channel for safety reasons, maybe. In this case, the footage is taken in winter, the trout are getting ready to spawn. I'm keeping my eye out for spawning reds, so just having this method where I don't have to move across the channel as much also really helps. As I mentioned earlier, it's really great for really slow pockets where you'd have to use really light nymphs on Euro. Or where you have to maybe use something heavier but sort of drag it through the, faster than the current, which isn't always desirable. Also, maybe you're fishing somewhere that is better for Euro nymphing, or where Euro nymphing is the best method, but the wind is picking up. And in really windy days, particularly if you're using much finer leaders, these thin level line, 0.14, something like that, 0.15. When the wind picks up, it can cause a bow, which really hampers your bite detection. So using dry dropper in the end of Euro can help mitigate that, because you've got your dry fly planted in the surface of the water, and it's much less susceptible to being interfered with by the wind. So when wouldn't I use this method? Well, if I've got anywhere that's really glassy stuff, where preferably I want to be much further away from the fish, doesn't work so well then, and I wouldn't really use it in deeper water stuff where maybe the bobber style or the bung would be a better approach. And also, if there's the opportunity for me to cast a fly line, me personally, I'd much rather do that as well. So if you're fishing a river where you can cast much further ahead of you, you can get much longer drifts than with this method. But for the water that it's really good at, it's phenomenal. So what kind of equipment would you use? Any long light rod works really well with this method. But even if you've got a short rod, the principles can still apply if it's appropriate for the water type you're on. So if I talk about the leader, any Euro leader that you're using, you can even use really long, fine tapered leaders, but they have to be preferably really supple, so you don't get too much sag between the rod tip and the fly. In terms of flies, the dry fly that I use either use a clink hammer or a fulling mill. I think size 14, sometimes maybe a size 12 Parachute Adams. I find the 12s hold up a 3.2 mil bead quite well. If I'm using 2.8 mil bead, I'll use a size 14. But you don't want a fly that's too buoyant, because then it's just I'm not just waiting for the indicator to go down. So something nice and sensitive. I like to use a nymph line. My setup, once again, competition legal, roughly 2 times the length of the rod from the end of my nymph line to my point fly. A nymph line also has the advantage in that it's so much nicer to handle in your hand. Tippet wise, you know, I try and fish relatively light, which generally speaking is 7x. I will go up to 6x. I was fishing one chalk stream where there's quite a bit of, it's got quite a fast flow, also lots of ranunculus, so I found it good to step up. Bear in mind I'm fishing a soft rod, in my case a 10-foot 10 Diamondback Ideal Nymph in a 2-weight line designation, so it's light enough, you know, lots of flex in the tip with you know, for tippet protection, but quite a lot of power in the butt section. So let's just talk about the GoPro footage that I'm about to show. I'm fishing a chalk stream. The average depth must be about 3 feet. We're in flood as well, so the river's a lot higher. We've got some pockets that are going up to 5 feet. I'm just over 6 foot, so I mean I can wade into about 4 feet of water before it starts spilling over the chest waders. There are loads of pockets of you know, eddies because there are flow deflectors for conservation measures. It has lots of conflicting currents as well. It's quite narrow, quite overgrown, so if you're fishing at the fly line, you know, you're not always going to be able to get the best casts. Not going to be always particularly accurate if you have to set the nymph quite far down from the dry fly. So on this occasion I was fishing a total length from the dry fly to the dropper, to the point fly, about 4.5 feet deep, something like that, and I did have a dropper spaced 50 centimeters up from the point fly. Average bead size I was using is 2.8 mil. Another advantage to this method is you can use quite light nymphs as well, because you can fish, you know, aim it quite far up ahead of you and get it quite far behind you, so plenty of time to get lighter flies to sink down. So if we talk about the first bit of water that I was fishing, so we've come into the swim. It's a lot shallow. This is probably the shallowest water I'll be fishing, shin height, so 18 to 20 inches. So over depth. Now, as a pleasure angler, you know, I don't need to be constantly making changes for each swim. I'm not restricted to fishing a certain section like they have in like the competitions, where making those kind of fine changes will be the difference. So here I'm just using various methods to help to fish this, in effect, over depth setup in the shallower water as, you know, a sort of temporary kind of get by measure, for want of a better description. So let's just talk about the first bit, how I keep the nymphs a bit higher up, or to prevent them from grounding. What I'll do is cast everything on a tight line. The tighter your line is to your nymphs, so in this case from your dry fly to your dropper, the more line there is in the water that's going to be affected by the flow. So we try and cast it at a more diagonal angle, so we have the largest cross section possible of line in the water, so there's the most amount of water acting on the line, which slows the sink rate down. If we have it more vertically, we have less line in the water, so i.e. less water acting on the fly line, so we can get it a bit deeper down. So there are principles you can apply in, you know, standard Euro with when you're sort of drifting. So the more vertical, the deeper you can get, the more diagonal, the higher it'll be in the water column, so that's good for, you know, shallower water. Sometimes you can change the angle through the drift if you're going to a deeper pocket. Yeah, so we can kind of apply those principles here to dry dropper as well. If I want to get a bit deeper, bear in mind I can't really sort of angle the rod tip, because remember that we've got the dry fly that's anchoring everything, so it's it doesn't matter what I do with the rod tip that much. So to get deeper down, you can do a couple of things. Cast a lot, as far up as you can. If you want to keep it shallower, just fish shorter at shorter range. Also, what you can do is sort of try and get the dry fly or the nymph to plop near the dry fly, so you've got loads of slack. And with slack, there's less tension, meaning that the nymph can drop down through the water column a lot quicker. So here in this first bit, I'm just casting with a tight line, trying to get it, trying to fish this over depth setup in the shallow water. I didn't catch any fish in the shallow bit, so as I moved up to the next section, which I know is a little bit deeper, I can start casting how I normally would. So I'm not trying to get everything with a tighter a tighter angle. So this bit here is much slacker. We've got a nice sort of eddy, well not really an eddy, but a nice bit of slow glassy water. And you know, it didn't take me long to get, you know, nibbles. I think I lost a couple of fish before landing an out of season brown. And here's where you can see one real advantage to this method, in that you can track it back through really slow currents because your dry fly is suspending those nymphs underneath. As I'm moving up, we're starting to see one of the other advantages that I mentioned earlier, in that you can really search out the water from one position a lot better than you could with Euro. If I was using Euro here, I'd have to be moving across the stream to get, you know, the optimum angle to cast at, which is usually, I don't know, just somewhere in the region of 4 to 45 degree angle upstream of you. Whereas here I can go upstream, I can go across, I can even track it down. And with standard Euro, it gets to a point where it goes downstream, everything starts to get tight and lift up, which is actually desirable. Sometimes when I'm Euro nymphing, I'll let that lift happen once every 3 to 4 drifts. You can do the same with the dry dropper as well, but what's really great about the dry dropper is that you can, you know, really stretch your arm out as it's going downstream and still get a relatively, you know, drag-free drift. You can then even start dropping the rod tip and letting some of the line go on the water to get even longer drift. So it works really well for getting, you know, for covering quite a lot of water. You'll also notice I'm striking not just you know, the indicator sinking, which is, you know, always a surefire sign that you've got a take, or, you know, the bottom, but I'm striking at any little bob anytime it, you know, deviates from what I consider a natural drift. If you also look what I'm doing, I'm employing what Howard Croston calls back-end control. So I'm never, you know, drifting with my, you know, left hand in the pocket out of the way. My left hand is well and truly involved, and I'm retrieving line. That's doing a couple of things. Firstly, when I strike, I'm doing a little bit of a strip strike. I find personally that gives me better hook sets, or I feel it gives me better hook sets. And the other thing is, as we mentioned earlier, and it's not so relevant to here because changing the angle with the rod tip is a bit meaningless when you've got the dry fly anchoring. But when you're doing standard Euro nymphing, and you want to maintain, let's just say, an angle like this because you're fishing shallower water, or you want to be slightly higher up in the current or in the water column. The problem is when you're just using the hand and this is doing nothing, when the rod, when the nymphs sort of pass where you are, just in front of you, you have to lift the rod up to take up the slack and then drop it down as it goes behind you. So when you're doing that, you're changing the angle, and by changing the angle, you can change the depth. So by retrieving, you're able to maintain the same angle all the time. Tying in with that as well is when I'm casting, I'm always trying to make sure that as quick as possible, I'm onto the nymph line, ready to retrieve. So sometimes while it's in midair, I kind of collect the line if I can, or as quick as really. Another thing to note is when the dry fly is in the air, I'm monitoring it so I can anticipate when it hits the water. What I don't want to happen is the dry fly hit the water, loads of the leader go onto the water, because then I'm going to have to pull the leader free off the water to the dry, and I'm going to move the dry back which in turn is going to move the nymph up through the water column and just reduce the amount of drift at the desirable depth that I want to be. So another advantage you can see is this river is very overgrown as well. So, you know, with this method, there's not really much of a back cast. I am doing a back cast, obviously, to help transfer energy into the blank. But yeah, generally speaking, I don't need lots of back casting space with this method. And as you can see, very often I'm using bow and arrow casts, which I'm finding, you know, on this river with all the snags, you know, just more accurate than actually casting itself. Obviously, when you're bow and arrow casting, it brings another element of sort of control that you have to work on, trying to, you know, bow and arrow and then, you know, getting ready for the drift, because invariably if you're bow and arrow casting, you're doing it a bit more short range, so you've got shorter drifts. You want to try and be in touch with everything as quick as possible. One thing to note is when I'm playing fish, when I hook a fish, I take a reference point. So I look at maybe a tree, something like that, because I want to be able to get back into that same spot again, because there might be, you know, a small pod of fish there. What I'm trying to do is, when I hook a fish, is take it downstream for a couple of reasons. Firstly, you don't want to be playing fish from upstream or trying to yank them upstream. You're more likely to lose them, have a break off, you name it. By getting downstream of the fish, it tires out a lot quicker, and, you know, also apply some side pressure to try and bring the fish into you as well. If I have no choice, I will go all the way downstream. Let's just say if a fish has run downstream, rather than try and pull it all the way up. Another way to deal with it, I find, is just to apply pressure, steady pressure, and, you know, sometimes the fish will sort of move up and then around, and then try and just find some kind of slack to play them in and land them in. So if I talk about the flies, nothing special, just pheasant tail nymphs or red tags really, tied on dry fly hooks. We're not catching big fish here. Dry fly hooks have a much finer gauge than your average hooked for nymphing. Finer gauge hooks penetrate mouths a lot better, especially of lighter fish that don't have the weight behind them. That's something that I picked up from listening to the competition guys. So if we recap over this method, it's a great way of being able to fish rivers that have lots of pockets and swirly water that perhaps are a bit too slow for Euro, but have too many conflicting currents for fly line. Perfect on occasions where you can get fairly close up to fish, which we can do with grayling. We can also fish, you know, cover lots of water from standing in one area with this method too. It also works pretty great, you know, in wind where, you know, Euro nymph would kind of be very hard to sort of manage. I've also used this method for coarse fish as well, you know, chub. And it's the same deal. As long as you can get fairly close up to the fish without being spotted, it works really well for fishing sort of like deeper holes and pools, stuff like that. You can even use it for stalking, you know, but personally I prefer a single fly. But it's very versatile. The only place I wouldn't use it is any time where fly line would be better, where you can get much longer drifts with fly line as well. Also, I wouldn't use it anywhere where you have just uniform glassy water. In that case, you know, stalking, you know, or sight fishing is what I would love to do, or using the old school upstream nymphing where you look at the end of your fly line for takes. For water where it's appropriate, this method is absolutely fantastic. If you have a river that you think is similar, why not give it a go? You've got absolutely nothing to lose. Just get yourself, you know, start off with a very thin tapered leader. Just give it a go. Dry drop on the end of Euro.